What's going on, everybody? Welcome to today's video. In today's video, we dive into the new starter decks that we kind of got a little preview of if you are someone who's been playing Arena for quite a while with the event that happened last week. I do apologize if I do feel a little bit echoey, as the room I now am in recording videos is still a little light on furniture, so I do not really have too much in the way of soundproofing, so I do apologize before we dive into today's video, but hopefully over the course of the next few weeks, I'll kind of hopefully be getting some things to hopefully help with that. With that being said, if you like the video, hit that like button. It definitely helps out a lot. If you're new here, want to post new videos on the channel, hit that subscribe button. But that being said, let's just dive into the decks and so let's just talk about it. Just wanted to give a special shout out to the channel members that you see your names here. These are the people who support the channel by either clicking the join button that's down below right next to the subscribe button if you want to get your name here on this list, or you can click the link in the description. I do appreciate it, as it does help support the channel. Now on with your video. So in today's video, we're going over the first 5 of the 10 new starter decks that are being implemented into MTG Arena, and we're going to be kind of, in no particular order, going to just be going over how I captured them. Now, the decks I currently have, as you can kind of see here behind me, are ones that I just have the cards already for. If you are someone who's been playing Arena for a while and don't have these starter decks unlocked yet, just wait out in the next few weeks. They probably will release these to you for free without actually having to, spend the wild cards to actually craft any of these cards. If you're a newer player, I believe these are what you're currently unlocking for the color challenges after you do the basic intro for the basic intro 5 decks. So these decks you may be already kind of getting, but if you haven't gotten to the point of having all of them, you may see some decks that you may not have unlocked just yet. But the first one up, we do have Growing Hunger. Growing Hunger is an interesting deck that was being introduced with this new set of starters. And the idea here is it looks like it's overall just trying to put +1/+1 counters on creatures to get certain effects based on those +1/+1 counters. Overall, from the couple of games I did play with this one, it did feel pretty good. I do think the one thing that can be said for any starter deck, that when you only have so many copies of certain cards, especially the good ones, sometimes it can be inconsistent on how you do draw, just because all the rares in the deck we do only play one copy of. So it does play a lot of other cards to kind of fill that up. But other than that, I mean, the deck is fun. I mean, if this is something you're looking for, just looking for ways to kind of pump up creatures, make them grow bigger, this is definitely a good starter deck. And the other thing, too, is, a lot of times if you're kind of wondering, as I kind of, this is just more of just talking about the deck in general in its state that you'll be getting it in the game. Later down the road, I will probably be doing an upgrade video, but if you're looking to possibly upgrade this, if this is something that you're interested in when it does come out, my general approach is everything is always, increase the amount of the cards that you really want more copies of. So I would start off with increasing the rares, maybe even the uncommons, like the spot removal and things like that, and then kind of get rid of the cards that you don't really like or don't feel like they're working out for what you're trying to do in the deck, and then kind of go from there. But nonetheless, like I said, the deck is pretty cool. It is like playing cards like Snake's Veil at 2 copies to give things +1/+1 counters, and Hexproof at instant speed to kind of protect the creature from possibly being killed by a particular spell and a removal spell. Then you got Fast Spread Fortification, same thing, just put a +1/+1 counter on it, with the benefit of it can be a land if we do need that additional land out on the battlefield. Then you got Orchid Jelly, which is a new card from Forgotten Realms. It's a X green 0/0 with trample, and it enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, and has an ability called Split that when it dies, if it had 2 or more +1/+1 counters on it, create a copy of that token at the beginning of the next end step. That token enters the battlefield, have as many +1/+1 counter, rounded down, and the effect actually still triggers. So if it is a 4/4, it goes down to a 2/2. If that 2/2 then dies, it will then create a 1/1. So you can essentially kind of have this infinite kind of like token. As long as you can kind of keep the tokens over 2, you're pretty good to have this ooze that just never goes away unless your opponent can deal with it. After that, in the 2-drop slot, we have Death Knell Berserker. It's a 2-mana 2/2. When it dies, if it was 3 or more power, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. And that's always good because you always have a creature that, replaces a creature that gets removed from the battlefield. So definitely good there. Then you got Power Word Kill, which is another removal spell. Definitely a good spell. Very interesting here. There are a lot of dragons in the format at the time, so it's very interesting. Sometimes good in certain matchups, not good in other matchups. But interesting removal spell. One of the better ones, just because it is 2 mana instant speed removal. So overall, pretty good. Then you got Big Play. Makes target creature have +2/+2. Have it gain reach and turn, and then you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Instant speed. Always very good to kind of catch your opponent off guard, whether you're going for a block or whether you're going for that additional damage. Always a good time. Then Ranger class is like, I think, the big standout card from green out of all the classes as well. It's a very powerful spell in the sense that, 2 mana, you get a green wolf token for additional 2 mana. You can get a +1/+1 counter whenever onto up to one target attacking creature. So you get to grow your green creatures. And then for 4 mana, you get to look at the top part of your library at any time. You may cast creature spells from the top of your library. So additionally, you can hopefully draw into more creatures if you're not really getting so lucky in your draw step. So overall, very good card. Like, this is definitely a card you definitely want more copies of if you do have rare wild cards available. Then you got the Mospit Skeleton, which is another blue black green spell that with kicker 3, if enters the battlefield with a if it was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters on it, and then whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature control, if Moss Skeleton's in our graveyard, you may put him on top of our library. So he does have a recurrent battle thing as long as we have +1/+1 counters being put on creatures we do control. Exponential Growth is a very interesting card that it's okay, but it's not great. It's one of those things that you have to end the turn double the target power of target creature X times, but the downfall is that it is sorcery space. Your opponent does kind of see it coming, so it's one of those things you really can't surprise your opponent. But interesting card nonetheless if you try to get through that lethal bit of damage and you don't feel like your opponent has any sort of removal. Then you got the Hagra Constrictor. It's a 3 mana 0/0. When it enters battlefield, 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has Menace. So just making your +1/+1 counter creatures that much harder to block because that means they have to commit 2 creatures in order to block it. Then you have the Promising Dusk Mage. It's a 3 mana creature that when it dies, if it has +1/+1 counters on it, draw a card. So you can hopefully draw something to replace it if it does end up dying in the process. But overall, very interesting card, very okay. Nothing too great about it. Then Oran Reef is another great card I do think is seen its kind of like day, especially in mono green at the moment, but it's a 3 mana 2/2 that when it enters battlefield, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature control, which is very good. So you get to make one of your creatures bigger, even itself. And then whenever it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature with a +1/+1 counter on it. So if you have an array of creatures that have +1/+1 counters on it, they all get additional +1/+1 counter on it, which is definitely very good. Then you got Greg Maul, the Skyclave Ravager, 3 mana 0/0, enters battlefield with up to 3 +1/+1 counters on it. Whenever another creature controlled dies, if it has a +1/+1 counter on it, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Greek Maul. When it dies, you get to create an XX green black Hydra creature token where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Greg Maul. So it has a way to, as long as it dies, kind of replace itself when it does leave the battlefield. So overall, pretty cool card. They have to exile if they don't want you to get the creature in the process. You have to struggle for Skimfar. It's a 4 mana sorcery spell that you get to put a +1/+1 counter creature you control. Then that creature fights up to one target creature you don't control. That's one of the things that green kind of has. It's a lot of fight spells as its removal. So making your creatures fight other creatures and trying to put give an additional +1/+1 counter is definitely very good. It is sorcery speed, so it's a little bit on the slower side, but overall pretty good. Then you got Master of this Simmertress. It's a 4 mana 4/4 with reach. When creatures you control with power equal to its toughness attack, they gain trample end of turn. So it kind of gives all your creatures that are XX that are equal, the additional trample without actually having the trample ability. So overall, pretty good card that definitely synergizes very well with the deck, just because most of our creatures do enter the battlefield as the same power and toughness. So giving them addition as they get a bit more and more +1/+1 counters, making them more and more threatening is always very good. And Binding of the Old Gods is a 4 mana enchantment saga that Chapter 1, destroy target not only permanent and opponent controls. Chapter 2, you get to search your library for a forest card, put on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. And then Chapter 3, gain control. Creatures you control gain death touch until end of turn. So overall, very, very good removal spell, and then has additional abilities as it stays on the battlefield. A little bit of mana ramp is always very good, and then death touch is very good too, especially if you're going through a very big swing. Even if your creatures aren't very strong, it's going to make it very challenging if your opponent really wants to block. If they're not like in any sort of way of going to die on that swing, they may not block just because the creatures have death touch. And then in the last little bit here of the deck, you have Tenured Incaster. It's a 5 mana 2/2 that when enters battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. And then whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter attacks, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. So essentially, even if your creatures don't deal damage and your opponent just chumps block things, they're still going to take a point of damage for each +1/+1 counter creature that is actually attacking. So overall, decent card that kind of synergizes very well with the +1/+1 counters of our deck. And then the last card of the deck is the Drana, the Last Blood Chief, 5 mana creature with flying. That's a 4/4. Whenever it attacks, if a player chooses a non-legendary card from your graveyard, you return that card to the battlefield with additional +1/+1 counter. Then that creature is a vampire to other types. So essentially, any of the cards that may have died early in the game, Drana can get them back out with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Just kind of reoccurring some things. Definitely pretty cool. There's some things that aren't as great to get back from the graveyard, but there are other things that can be very, very good and very, hard for your opponent to deal with, especially it coming back that much stronger. And then the decks, of course, like these starter decks, they always like to do like 24 lands. You have 10 of the swamps, 9 of the forests, 1 of the pathways, and 4 of the woodland chasms. I do sometimes think they also have 25 lands, and the one fast fortification is kind of that 25th land in the deck. But overall, I think the deck is pretty good, and I do think as long as you kind of add additional copies of some of the rares in the deck, I do think this deck could cause some havoc for your opponent, especially being a newer player. If this is something you're looking to upgrade down the line, and this is definitely a decent deck to start out with if you're looking for that more mid-rangey kind of synergy kind of style deck. Now, the next card up is the Lifeline deck. Now, this is kind of like one of my personal favorites out of all of them that I played, and I do think from when I did do the post the other day of talking about these new starter decks from the event, that this is kind of, a lot of people also did enjoy this deck, and essentially it's a life gain deck that, makes creatures bigger or has certain things that happen whenever you gain certain life. The big card really being in the deck is Sarah, the Moon Dancer. Whenever you gain life, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it, and you also get to scry one. So a very good card, very, very big. Definitely grow with the way we have a lot of life gain in the deck very, very quickly, making it hard to deal with. The one downfall, it doesn't have trample, so that is the one problem. But other than that, we have the Cleric class at 2 copies. If we gain life, we gain that much life +1. We can tap 4 and we can level it up. And whenever we gain life, we get to put a +1/+1 counter target creature control, so we can get other creatures with additional +1/+1 counters other than just that card. And for 5 mana, whenever it becomes level 3, return target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield, and we gain life equal to its toughness. So if we want a lot of our creatures have big, toughness is when they get back from the graveyard, so we can get them back and gain that much life, which is definitely very good, especially if we're kind of low on life in that process. But with this kind of deck, as long as we get the life gain going, we really gain a lot of life before our opponent can really start damaging us or getting through 4 damage. Then the next card up is we do have Fortify and Draw. It's a 1 mana instant speed spell that we gain 2 life. Target creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the amount of life we gain this turn. So not just the 2 life here, but if we gain other life during the turn, we may actually get more additional +X/+X. And if you had a very good turn where you may have played something like in our 2-drop slot, whenever you play like a creature, you gain some life, this could get some additional damage. And if your opponent doesn't decide to block, you can tap 1 mana, maybe get +4/+4, or even more, depending on how much creatures or whatever things may have popped off before going off. And for 1 mana, it's definitely a very good pump spell for this style of deck. Then we got the Story Seeker. It's a 2 mana 2/2 with lifelink. Just a solid 2/2 kind of like dwarf kind of creature that it's like a decent bear with lifelink, which is always very good. It's one of those things that kind of helps us get through that additional damage. If you start putting +1/+1 counters on something like this, this is kind of like a way to get back some life in big chunks, especially as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Then we have Devouring Tendrils as kind of that spot removal. It's a 2 mana spell that target creature control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. When the permanent you don't control dies, you gain 2 life. So when their creature dies, we get additional life, which is definitely very good. We have Inscription of Abundance. It's a 2 mana instant speed spell with kicker. If we can choose one. If it was kicked, we may choose any. And the choose any are the 3 different things we can choose are: put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. Target creature gains +X life, where X is the greatest power among creatures I control. And the target creature you control fights the target creature you don't control. So essentially, it's a fight spell, a pump spell, and also let me get some additional life spells. So depending on what the situation is, you can always choose any of them. If you have the 5 mana open, you may actually choose all of them and get all of those abilities, which is definitely very good for this style deck. Then the Prosperous Innkeeper is definitely a very good card. It's definitely a very good card that synergizes very well with life gain. Because of the instance of when it enters the battlefield, we get to create a treasure token, which gives us a little bit of ramp, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under control, we gain 1 life. So it's a 2 mana 1/1 that essentially gives us our triggers that kind of like kind of like a Daxos trigger, but for green, which is definitely very good. I mean, it doesn't have devotion or anything like that, but it does have a way to just give us additional life whenever we play creatures. We kind of already went over Lasara, but overall, very good card. The life, when it gets a +1/+1 counter every time we gain life, which is definitely very good. And then we also get the Scry is also very good, so we can kind of look for answers or look for more ways to gain life to kind of get more triggers, which is always very good for the deck. Then we get the Celestial Unicorn. It's kind of just like the Terrasara, but a common version. It's a 3 mana 3/2. Then whenever we gain a life, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on our Unicorn. Just another card that synergizes very well whenever we gain points of life. Core Celebrant's a 3 mana 1/4. When it or another creature enters the battlefield under our control, we gain 1 life. So just another card that just has life gain triggers whenever creatures enter the battlefield, which just synergizes with our life gain thing. Minimus Containment. It's an interesting kind of like, let's kind of enchant one of our opponent's creatures. An enchanted permanent now is a treasure artifact, and it can be sacrificed for mana of any one color, and it loses all other abilities. So it's another good card that kind of kind of enchants with our against our opponent's cards, makes their things into life. If it maybe is one of their big creatures, now their thing becomes a treasure token instead of maybe a big creature that's gonna do big damage. So definitely a very interesting aura. I don't really know if it's a very good aura, but it's definitely very good in this kind of starter deck sense. Then you got Righteous Valkyrie, which is another solid card in the deck. It whenever an angel or cleric enters the battlefield under control, we gain life equal to that creature's toughness. And I actually haven't really been paying attention, but I do think there's a lot of clerics in the deck, so definitely good ways for us to gain multiple triggers every time we play a cleric. And as long as we have 7 or more life, some more life total than our starting total, creatures we control get +2/+2, so it has like a built-in anthem effect as long as we're over 27 life, which is definitely very good. And then you have the Lurkin Roper. It's a 3 mana 4/5. It doesn't untap during our untap step, but whenever we gain life, it actually untaps. So it's something that's very interesting. It synergizes very well with our life gain, and it's one of those things. Whenever we gain life, it can just be untapped, so we can attack in, do some damage with it, and then gain some life and untap it, so it's ready for a block, which is definitely very good synergies for us, preventive us from taking damage from our opponent. Being the Attend Healer, it's a 4 mana 2/3 that whenever we gain life for the first time each turn, we get to create a 1/1 cat creature token. And then for 3 mana, another cleric gains lifelink at the end of turn. So it just has it's a creature that kind of pumps out tokens and also makes other clerics get lifelink, which then synergizes very well with the ability that it does have, and as well as our other other avenues of triggering life gains or getting life gain triggers and +1/+1 counters and things like that. Then we have Felidar Retreat, which is another solid card. Now, our deck doesn't really have a lot of lands that, we can go searching for other lands to make this landfall trigger happen multiple times in a single turn. But, the added benefit of when we play a land under our control, we get to create cat tokens, which just make our board much wider. Or we can pull +1/+1 counters on each creature we control, and those creatures gain vigilance so they don't tap when they attack. Which is definitely, I think, very good for this style of deck. So we can attack in with something like a Lurkin Roper with its +1/+1 counter from this, and it actually doesn't tap to have to attack. So its ability of it not untapping during our tap steps doesn't actually happen. So it's definitely a good card that kind of synergizes very well with our deck and leaves a lot of our creatures back on defense. Then we got Ice in Death, the Frost Tyrant. It's a 4 mana 4/3 flying vigilancer. When it dies, we get to create a Frost Tongue legendary white art equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+2, and then whenever equipped creature attacks, tap target creature defendant player controls and equip 2. So it's definitely a very interesting card here. It's a 4/3 flyer for 4 mana, which is definitely very good, and it also has vigilance. It doesn't have lifelink or anything, but I do like the idea that it has the weapon that if it does die, we get instead, and it makes us tap down our opponent's things whenever we swing in for some big damage, possibly. So it's definitely very, very good if we're trying to prevent our opponent from having blockers to really block our stuff when it does come in for some of that damage. Then the next card up is you meet in a tavern. We get to choose one, form a party, look at the top 5 cards of our library, reveal any number of creature cards among them, put them into our hand, put the rest on the bottom of our library in any random order. So essentially, it's just a good card that kind of helps us fill our hand back up with maybe more creatures if we're looking for some more creatures. And the second ability is Starter Brawl. Creatures we control get +2/+2 in end turn, so it's just kind of like a little bit of a global board pump that we can maybe swing in aggressively if we're looking to do some big damage to our opponent's face. Getting an additional +2/+2 is definitely very good, though I would say it is kind of one of the downfalls of it being at sorcery speed, so we can't surprise our opponent with a party pump in the attack step. We have to do it before attacking, so it's the one downfall of that second ability. But other than that, it's a pretty decent card that helps us refill our library back up in most situations, as green and white really don't have a lot of ways to draw a bunch of cards. Then we get the Pillar Drop Rescuer. It's a 5 mana 2/2 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from our graveyard. So it returns a lot of cards from our graveyard back to our hand, which is overall pretty good. Just reoccurring some things back from our graveyard to our hand definitely allows us to replace some things that may have been removed by removal or board wiped or whatever. And for 5 mana, it's okay. It's not great because it's only a 2/2 for 5. But the idea that we can reoccur some stuff back is always very good. So we can always replay it and then maybe just get that threat presence going again. Then we have Drizzy Do Erden. It's a 5 mana 3/3. It has double strike. When it enters the battlefield, create a Gwennar legendary 4/1 cat creature token with trample. And whenever a creature dies, if it has power greater than Driznar's, put a number of +1/+1 counters onto Drizzy equal to the difference. So essentially, Drizzy will kind of gain +1/+1 counters equal to the difference in the power of of that creature that may have died. So if it's something like Telodressar that has a bunch of counters on it, and it's like a 7/7, Drizzt will then gain 4 +1/+1 counters on it. which essentially makes it even more threatening because of the double strike ability. And that double strike is definitely something your opponent has to kind of watch out for, because if they don't block it, they're taking additional damage, because it'll be even at base power and toughness, it'll be at least taking 6 damage if it gets in with no block. So overall, very interesting card here. Definitely synergizes very well with some of our bigger creatures in the deck overall, but it's a pretty decent card. It is legendary, so you can only play one of them if you had multiples, but other than that, it's a pretty good card. We got Maja, Brett Guard, Protector. It's a 5-mana 2/3. Other creatures can go get +1/+1. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we get to create a 1/1 white human creature token. So it's a very interesting card. It's kind of like, it has a built-in Anthem effect. It has a built-in effect that whenever we play lands, we get tokens, we get wider. So our tokens come in actually as 2/2s instead of 1/1s, and all our other creatures are even that much stronger with that additional +1/+1. So overall, pretty interesting card that is kind of interesting in how it synergizes with our deck, but it's an interesting card to have in the deck just to make everything that much better. And then the last card in the deck is Valkyrie Harbinger. It's a 6-mana 4/5 fly-in lifelinker. At the beginning of each of our end steps, if we gain 4 more life this turn, we get to create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying and vigilance. So just another creature that has, makes our creatures do that much more damage. Pretty interesting card there. And then the mana base, like I said, is roughly around 24 as well. It's 10 plains, 9 forests, 4 of the Arctic tree lines, and 1 pathway, which I think turns out to be 24 lands. So this one's only playing 24. Though I would say maybe it could play a 25th or 26th land. Just on the idea here, we are trying to play some more expensive things. But other than that, the deck is pretty good, and especially when you do get the life gain going and the triggers and pumping of creatures that get +1/+1 counters whenever we gain life, it can become something hard to deal with if your opponent can't draw any sort of removal to deal with it. Now, this next deck up is kind of something that I kind of made something similar to in my budget video deck, but this is something that's actually very interesting. It's called Savage Lands. It's a starter deck that plays around a lot of the landfall, and it's very aggressive aggro-y, has ways to kind of put multiple lands into the battlefield, whether it's a spell that does it, or has ways of playing something like Evolving Wilds that makes landfall triggers happen. So it's something that is definitely very aggressive. It can be very explosive if your opponent just doesn't have anything in the early game. If you just get the right card draw with enough lands, you can definitely just win the game by turn 4 or 5. It did happen to me. I did get just that perfect lineup of lands by getting some Brushfire Elementals, a couple Evolving Wilds. It was just kind of over there, because as we kind of go through the deck, you'll kind of see why certain things are pretty good, and they're very aggressive too. If your opponent can't really deal with them, they can get hit for a big amount of damage before they really get started on their own end. But the first card up, we do have a Comb Hellhound. It's a 1-mana 0/1. Whenever a land enters battlefield under control, it gets +2/+2 into end of turn. Now, other than that, I mean, the one downfall to decks that rely on certain things like lands to come into the battlefield to give things +2/+2. If you don't draw lands, this thing's only a 0/1 that doesn't really do anything other than that. So it is the one downfall to his deck that does play something like this style. You get the Hobgoblin Captain. It's a 2-mana 3/1 with the Pack Tactics ability. Whenever it attacks, if we attack a creature's power 6 or greater, it actually gains first strike on that turn. Definitely allows it to attack it more aggressively, even though it does only have 1 toughness. So it is something that your opponent kind of has to deal with, but it definitely makes it hard to block, because anything less than 3 toughness will instantly die to the first strike side of this card. You get Royal Eruptions, a 2-mana spell with kicker 5, and it deals 3 damage to any target. If it was kicked, it deals 5 damage instead. It's a decent removal spell, though it is sorcery speed, so you have to kind of do it on your turn, unfortunately, which is the one downfall to this spell. But the idea in the late game, if you do draw something like this, you can just do 5 damage to your opponent's face if you do have the open mana. You got Bull Strength as a 2-mana instant speed spell that a target creature gets +2/+2, and it gains trample and under turn, and you get to untap it, so you just get to pretend that creature didn't actually attack at all by untapping it, or you can use it as a very strategic way to swing in aggressively on your turn. Your opponent may not block it, and then on your turn, your opponent attacks in kind of aggressively. You get to put +2/+2 in target creature. Trample doesn't really matter at that point, but you get to untap that creature and now make it be able to block your opponent's creature that's swinging in that you want to get rid of. So overall, pretty interesting card here. 2 manas. It's not a great pump spell, but it's an okay pump spell for this, beginner starter deck. And the next card up is Werewolf Pack Leader. It's a very good card that has seen a lot of play, especially in the mono green deck. But it has the Pack Tactics ability that whenever it attacks, if we attack with party 6 or greater, a power 6 or greater, this turn we get to draw a card. So a card that just has a draw effect is always very good. And then for 4 mana until end of turn, it gets base power and toughness 5/3 and gains trample end of turn, and is not a human. So essentially the pump is kind of like makes it into a true werewolf, as it's partial human and werewolf at the moment of, without the ability. But overall, pretty good way to kind of get that additional damage in, and the trample is always a decent benefit there. And then pumping it up, it just gets you that much closer to triggering pack tactics as well. And Brushfire Elemental is kind of one of my favorite cards in this deck, just because it's a very good card that can be very explosive if your opponent can't deal with it. It's a 2-mana 1/1, which doesn't make it seem anything that great, but it does have haste, so it can swing it immediately when it does come into the battlefield, which is always very good. It can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, so it can't be chump blocked just by small tokens that your opponent may create. And it has the landfall ability that whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +2/+2 in a turn, which is very good because you play your land on the turn. You play your land for turn 3 after you have played it on the prior turn. It becomes a 3/3. If that land is Evolving Wilds, you can then crack Evolving Wilds and make it a 5/5. And if your opponent has little small creatures that are power 2 or less, they can't block, and your opponent's now taking 5 damage to the face. If you do draw like 2 of these by like turn 3, play one on turn 2, deal 1 damage to your opponent's face. Play your second one on turn 3, have 2 of these out, then play your Evolving Wilds. They're both 3/3s, so now you can swing in for 6. You can crack the Evolving Wilds, get additional +2/+2 on each, and then swing in for 10. And if your opponent has small little creatures, they can't block, and your opponent's now sitting probably at this point somewhere around like 8 or 9 life points, and just one more turn and one more land, the game is pretty much over if they can't really deal with these creatures. So overall, very explosive creature that doesn't look too intimidating until you realize that you can't just chump block it and put things in front of it. Then you got Targnar, Demon Fang Null, 2-mana 2/2. Definitely a very interesting card here. It is, prone to getting spot removal, but overall it's a pretty good card that if it attack creatures power 6 or greater with the pack tactics ability, attacking creatures get +1/+0 on end of turn, and for 4 mana we can double its power and toughness on end of turn, so we can just make it that much bigger. Get the pack tactics trigger, then play the 4 mana, then it becomes a 6/4 that your opponent has to now deal with. Definitely a very explosive card. Definitely makes our overall attacking party very explosive. For 2 mana, it's definitely a very, very good card. Then you got the Holgrim Bugbear. It's a 3-mana 3/3 haster. Other than that, it's just something that can attack it immediately for 3 damage. Turn 3 is maybe your opponent may not have super strong things, so it's definitely something that can get in. Your opponent may not want to block just because it's only 3 damage, but overall pretty strong, solid card. Just I don't really know what else to say because it really has much else going on. Then we have Choose Your Weapon. It's a 3-mana instant speed spell that choose one. We get to do 2 weapon fight and double target creature's power and toughness on a turn. So we can make something like a Brushfire Elemental that could be a 5/5 into a 10/10 on a turn. Or it has Archery, where this spell deals 5 damage to target creature with flying. So if your opponent's playing something in the air, you can always get some quick spot removal and just kind of snipe it out of the air and prevent it from getting in for that free damage, because this deck doesn't have too much in the way of reach. So this is definitely something that can definitely help. Then we have Scale the Heights. It's a 3-mana sorcery spell. It put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature. We gain 2 life when we play this additional land this turn. So, this definitely synergizes very well with those landfall cards that we do have in our deck. And then we get to also draw a card, which is also very good. So, just an overall pretty decent card that synergizes very well with our landfall triggers in the deck. Then we get Kinzandu Mammoth. It's a 3-mana 3/3 with landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under control, it gets +2/+10 a turn, and has the ability to also be a land in case we do need that additional green mana source. But overall, very good card that can get very, very big, just like any of the other landfall creatures in our deck. Though the one downfall, it doesn't have trample, it doesn't have any sort of other special ability, but it can get very big with just even the play-in of 1 land. So it goes from a 3/3 to a 5/5. Because that Evolving Wilds, it goes up to a 7/7. So just a creature that just gets very big very, very quickly if your opponent doesn't deal with it. They make Towsky, Bearer of Secrets. It's a 4-mana 1/1 indestructible. It can't be countered. It attacks each turn if able, and if any creature we control deals damage to a player or combat damage to a player, we get to draw a card. So we swing in with 4 things. Our opponent blocks 1. They take damage from 3 things. We get 3 cards. So overall, just a good card that helps refill our hand back overall. The one downfall is it does have to attack each turn if able, so it can't just sit back on defense the whole time and just absorb, chump block, maybe your opponent's biggest creature. So that's the one downfall to the card. Then the next card up is Vastwood Surge. It's a 4-mana spell with kicker. We get to search our library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tab, then shuffle. If the spell is kicked, we get to put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature control. A decent, strong 4-mana, just pump, ramp up a little bit, and then if we get into the late game, we draw this, we can then ramp up, making landfall triggers happen. Then on top of it, getting 2 additional +1 counters on each of our creatures that may be out on the battlefield at the time. So overall, pretty good card that helps our deck become that much more explosive. Then the next card up in the deck is Keem. It's a 5-mana 4/4 trample haster. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, exile up to that many cards from their graveyard. Put a +1/+1 counter on Keem for each creature exiled this way, and then you can also exile other non-creature cards. You get 1 life for each non-creature card exiled this way. So a card that can either gain you life or get bigger, and makes it even tougher to deal with because of that trampling, and just continues eating graveyards every turn, especially when it starts getting bigger and bigger. Then we have Owlbear. It's a 5-mana 4/4 with trample, keen senses. When it enters the battlefield, we have to draw a card. Just an overall decent card that is okay in size. Helps us draw a little bit, just because green doesn't have a lot of ways to draw, or red. And then it has trample too. So if your opponent doesn't, it blocks with a small creature, you'll still get some damage through, which is always very good. And then in the top end, for the high end of the deck, we have Inferno Star Mounts. It's a 6-mana 6/6 flying haster. It's one of the new dragons from Forgotten Realms. It can't be countered, so you can play it regardless if your opponent's playing a control deck. And then for 1 mana, it gets +1/+0, so it's kind of like a Shivian Dragon. But if this creature gets 20 power this way, it deals 20 damage to any target, so you can just do 20 damage to your opponent's face, 20 damage to a creature, whatever the situation may call for. If you get it that high, it actually then deals damage to anything. So overall, pretty interesting ability, though it is kind of hard to pull off to get that 20 power. Then you got Pylath, World Sculptor. It's a 6-mana 5/5. Enters the battlefield, we get to create 0/1 green plant creature tokens equal to the amount of basic land cards we control. And it has a landfall ability that whenever land enters the battlefield under control, we get to put 4 +1/+1 counters onto target plant creature we control. So one of our plant creatures grows each turn if we are able to continuously play lands after the plants have come out. So overall, pretty interesting card that creates bigger and bigger threats. And like I said, the plant creatures initially aren't that threatening, but as you play more lands, they become more and more threatening. Your opponent has to now deal with them really, or get rid of them before you can really grow them. Then for the mana base, it's overall pretty straightforward. It is 9 mountains, 8 forests, 1 of the pathways for the red and green, 4 of the highland forest, and 4 evolving wilds. So overall, it's a very good deck. It's a very explosive deck. It does, it's one of those things that as long as you can continuously draw lands and draw a decent amount of creatures that benefit from lands, the deck can end games pretty quickly. So this is definitely something that if you're looking for something a little bit more aggressive, this is definitely a deck that's up your alley. Now this next deck up is Sky Patrol. This is kind of like a deck that utilizes things like Foretell and things like that, and to get additional benefits. It's kind of a little bit like a control deck, but a little bit like an aggro deck. But like I said, utilizes Foretell to kind of be that little bit of both. So overall, the deck is pretty interesting. It is a little bit of the slower deck, so you're not going to win games very early, but you probably can get a decent mid-range setup and kind of keep the board clean by some of the various cards that we do have in the deck. You could pull off a game in the mid to late game overall. So the first cards up in the deck are Portable Hole. We do play 2 copies. It's a 1-mana artifact that when it enters the battlefield, you get to exile target not only a permanent and opponent controls with mana value 2 or less, and until it leaves the battlefield. So this gets rid of tokens, gets rid of any sort of class enchantment, because most class enchantments, I think for the most part, are 2 or less for the most part. I do think there's one exception. I think there's one class that may be 3 mana or 4 mana. I can't remember off the top of my head. But overall, pretty good, spot removal card in the early game just to kind of get rid of that pesky thing your opponent may play. So overall, pretty good card. Then you got Spellbinder's Familiar. It's a 1-mana 1/1. But whenever one or more cards are put into exile during your turn, you get to put a +1/+1 counters on Spellbinder's Familiar, and this thing only triggers once each turn. So whenever we foretell a card, this thing will grow up in size, and eventually, if you foretell enough things over the course of X amount of turns, this thing could become something that it could be a threat, and if your opponent doesn't deal with it very early. Then you have Dawnbringer Cleric. It's a 2-mana 1/3. Enters battlefield to choose one. We get to Cure Wounds, which we gain 2 life. We get to Spell Magic. We get to exile target enchantment. And for the last one, we get to Gentle Response. Exile target card from a graveyard. So if there's something that your opponent they may have in their graveyard, and they can reoccur, we can exile that card and not allow them to reoccur that card. So overall, pretty decent card that has different abilities based on the situation that you may have to deal with. We have Luminarch Aspirant, which is another great card for the deck. It's a card that helps us pump our creatures up to make them that much more aggressive to attack in with. And overall itself, having this happen at the beginning of our combat every turn is always very good. And if our opponent can't deal with the Aspirant, our creatures can get very big very, very quickly. You got Carfell Harbinger. It's a 2-mana 1/3, and then it has an ability that can tap to add blue. But you can only spend this mana only 2 foretell cards from our hand, or cast an instant or sorcery spell. So that's the one downfall to the card. It helps foretell, but it doesn't really help do anything else other than cast instants of sorceries. So the one downfall is it can not cast any of the foretelled creatures you may foretell, but other than that, it can cast any of the other foretell spells that you may be able to flip that are instants and sorceries. So it's kind of like that win-lose situations. Not really sure if it's a great card, but it's an okay card for the deck. Yeah, Elite Spellbinder, which is an amazing card in that kind of control style, kind of, tax on our opponent's hand kind of thing. It's a 3-mana, 3/1 flyer that enters battlefield. Look at opponent's hand, you may exile a non-land card from it. For as long as that card remains exiled, its owner must pay it. Its owner may play it at a skill blah, blah, blah. I can't speak right now. A spell cast this way may cost 2 or more to cast. So overall, it just makes something that your opponent may be wanting to play in their deck to get their deck going that much more expensive. So we're taxing that one single card. Definitely a good card just to kind of like fly over for some 3 points of damage. Also, like taxing their opponent's hand, especially if their opponent's drawn pretty well. We could disrupt their curve, making things take a little bit longer to actually set up on your opponent's side. Then the next card up is Expel. It's a 3-mana removal spell that exiles target tap creature. The one downfall to this card, it is very, it's very situational in the sense that your opponent has to tap their creature in order for this card to be useful. Other than that, it's just a card that sits in your hand waiting for that creature to tap. If a creature has vigilance and attacks, that card's never tapping unless it has some sort of tap ability. So it is kind of one of those cards that is okay in some situations, but not great in others. And that's the one downfall, I think, to the card to why you don't see it played more often when it comes to removal for white. And the next card up is Iron Verdict, a 3-mana instant spell that deals 5 damage to target tap creature. Yet again, just like Expel, it's another thing that's situational, and this only does things if your opponent's creatures are tapped. But you can foretell it and actually only pay 1 to do the actual effect if you flip it over. So it can get cheaper, especially if you're just waiting for that situation to happen. But other than that, it's not a great card just because, yet again, it's situational, and you have to have that situation to happen in order for you to get this ability. So it's yet again one of those cards that I do think there's other cards you could get more copies of because that may not be as situational as something like this card. You get Grazilax, the Ithalid Scholar. It's a 3-mana 3/2. Whenever creature we control becomes blocked, we may return it to its owner's hand. So essentially, we can swing in if we're swinging aggressively, our opponent may chump block some things, or things may want it to die. If certain things are going to die, we can always have the choice of returning them back to our hand to possibly replay them, which is also very good. And then whenever one or more creatures we control deals combat damage to a player, we get to draw a card. So overall, another good card to just kind of help fill our hand back up. Definitely synergizes very well with us kind of getting momentum and keeping it going. So definitely very, very good. You have 3 copies of Salt coming. A very strong counter spell that we can foretell. We can then pay 2 to actually play from the foretell ability. So overall, very, very good card. It just counters any spell that your opponent may play, not just instants or sorceries or creatures or enchantments. Any spell that your opponent's going to cast, we can have a counter set up and counter it. Then you got Vega the Watcher. It's a 3-mana 2/2 flyer. Whenever we cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, we get to draw a card. So all our cards that we're now foretelling, as long as Vega is out on the board, we now get to draw cards when we do cast those when we do play those foretell cards. So overall, very, very good card. That kind of synergizes very well with our foretell. Then we also have Starnheim Unleashed. It's definitely a very good card. It's a 4-mana sorcery spell that we get to create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying and vigilance. If this spell is foretold, we can create X of those tokens instead. It does have a double X. You have to have a decent amount of mana to create a decent amount of tokens. So it is one of those things in certain situations that sometimes you may want to get greedy and you want to create 3 or 4 or more angel tokens. But in some situations, you may just want to create that 2 or 1, depending on what your opponent may be doing or how aggressive or how wide their board is. Sometimes it's not always great to go for that big Starnheim Unleashed. So I guess you would need to read the board before you really figure out what or how you're going to cast it. So if your opponent's very aggressive, you may need to cast it as a cheaper just angel and just get on the battlefield and just get in your opponent's way so they can't they're not hitting your life points and you're not doing anything in order to protect yourself. You have the Augury Raven. It's a 4-mana 3/3 flyer with foretell. Yet again, just another thing that synergizes with our foretell and kind of style of deck. It is, for 4-mana 3/3 flyer, it's not great, but for 2-mana 3/3 flyer, it's not as bad. But it does take some setup to really get it for the cheaper end. So in the early game, we can do it on turn 2, and then maybe wait till turn 4, maybe then play it on turn 4, but for only 2 mana, and then have 2 mana to do something else. So it all depends on the situation, but a decent card that kind of just has foretell ability. Yeah, Behold the Multiverse. It's a 4 mana instant spell that you get to scry to and then draw 2 cards, but you can also foretell it and then only pay 2 to actually cast it. So this is definitely a very strong card just because it's a very good card that we can set up the top 2 cards of our library to maybe either one card that we want to keep and definitely draw, or we want to keep both of them and draw both of them, or we don't like any of them. We just want to draw 2 fresh cards blindly. It depends on the situation, but overall very, very strong spell that just helps us refill our hand back up, and also we can scry in the process. You get the Cosmos Charge. It's a 4 mana 3/3 flyer with flash. And then foretelling cards from our hand cost 1 less and can be done at during any player's turn. And we can itself foretell it for 3 mana. So definitely very good. And I do like the idea that it makes our foretell an ability from our hand costless. So we can now foretell for only 1 mana, which is also very good. Which then allows us to kind of then flip our cards over for that much less mana, which then creates maybe some of those more expensive foretell cards, maybe make it seem like it's a much better play. So overall, very, very good card that kind of just synergizes very, very well when it comes to foretelling. And with the Journey to Oblivion, it's a 5 mana enchantment that the spell costs 1 less for each creature in your party. When it enters the battlefield, to exile target non-land permanent opponent controls until end of turn, or until Journey to Oblivion leaves the battlefield. Sorry, not till end of turn. But we do play a fair amount of various creatures. We have clerics, we have wizards, we have spirits. Yeah, so I mean, maybe we're not going to get it for super cheap, but we can get it for cheaper if we have a wizard or a cleric or both on the battlefield. So we may get it for 3 mana, we may get it for 4 mana. Worst case scenario, we do get it for 5 mana. So it's one of those things it's okay, but it's not great just because we don't play enough creatures with party to consistently get it for much, much cheaper all the time. And we also have Doomscar in the deck at 1 copy. It's a 5 mana destroy all creatures, but we can foretell it for 2 mana and then play for 3 mana, which is definitely very good, especially against those more aggressive decks. On turn 2, you can set up it for turn 3, especially if their opponent's playing quickly and aggressively. And so it's definitely very good. Though the one downfall is if we're playing a very creature-heavy deck that, if we do have to Doomscar, we may have to Doomscar some of our own creatures. So hopefully we don't have too many good cards on the deck when we do actually Doomscar. Then the last card up in the deck is we have Shepard of the Cosmos. It's a 6 mana 3/3 flyer, but when it enters the battlefield, we get to return target permanent card with mana value 2 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield. So it has kind of like a special res ability, and we can also in the early game set it up and foretell it for 2 mana and then play it for 4 mana, which maybe turn 2 you set it up, maybe turn 3 then cast it. It depends on the situation, but overall pretty good card that allows us to recur something in our lower end of the deck, depending on the situation. And it's actually any return target card with mana value 2 or less from our battlefield, from our graveyard to the battlefield. So we can actually target, our artifacts. It can target our, lands because they're technically permanents. It doesn't say non-land permanents. So you can get back a land that may have ended up in the graveyard back onto the battlefield. So overall, depending on the situation, you can always get back a multitude of various things. And the mana base is pretty straightforward. It's 11 plains, 9 islands, 4 of the floodplains, and 1 of the pathways. So, coming in at the good old 25 lands, just because it's a little bit more of a control deck, you want a little bit more lands. But playing the foretell, it's definitely cool to see a foretell deck kind of synergize and trying to get things that synergize very well. That's putting cards in exile, and overall pretty decent deck if you're looking at something that's a little bit on the control side, but not too control, that you can attack in and do some damage to your opponent's face. Now, this last deck up in the first part of the starter decks is Treasure Hunt. And this is a very interesting deck that I've kind of built my own kind of version of the deck, but I didn't even realize they were coming out with a starter deck version until afterwards. And it's kind of a cool deck that, utilizes, the creation of treasures. If you haven't seen a lot of cards from the new set, do certain things as long as it was cast with a treasure or you sacrifice a treasure to do something. So overall, pretty interesting deck that just helps, benefits us or does certain things based on the treasures that we have created. And especially there's some cards in the deck that allow us to create additional treasures and things like that, or just take us, make other creatures bigger, or, allow us to sacrifice things just to get treasures. So overall, it's an interesting deck that has a good unique engine that kind of allows us to do even more damage. And the deck, like I said, is fairly decent in its base form, but you can definitely get some very, very good results, especially when you start upping the amount of rares and mythics in the deck to consistently, be able to draw cards that are going to help us, benefit us and create more treasures overall. In the one drops that we have Shambling Gas. It's a 1 mana 1/1, and when it dies, we get to choose one. We get the Brave the Stench. We get to target creature gets -1/-1 to end a turn. So this kills a lot of your opponent's small little tokens or creatures. And then for the second ability, we can search the body and we get to create a treasure token. So one card that in itself, like I said, creates treasure, which helps us ramp a little bit. And Black and Red's not really known for its ramp, but creating treasures is a big part of this deck. We got Unwilling Ingredients, a 1 mana 1/1 menace. For 3 mana, we can exile it from our graveyard. We get to draw a card and we lose a life. So just a little bit of card draw in the deck. But other than that, it's a pretty strong card in the early game just because your opponent can't really block it unless they block it with 2 or more creatures. Then we got Deadly Dispute. It's a 2 mana instant spell that at an additional cost to cast the spell, we get to sacrifice an artifact or creature. Treasure tokens are artifacts, so we can sacrifice those if we really want to cast it. But for 2 mana, we get to draw 2 cards and we get to create a treasure token. So if we sacrifice a treasure, we can then replace the treasure, or if we sacrifice maybe one of our smaller creatures, we can draw 2 cards and also create a treasure, which is also very good at instant speed, which makes it amazing for, I think, with it only being a common and 2 mana, it makes it actually pretty good. Higher Hexblade, it's a 2 mana creature with that's a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, if a mana from treasure was spent to cast it, you have to draw a card and lose a life. So it's a card that just benefits us from using treasures to cast it, making us draw a card, though we do lose a life. But other than that, if we're trying to dig a little bit deeper for maybe an answer, or just trying to make our fill it back our hand after we play it, it is a good card that replaces itself even when we do play it onto the battlefield. Next card up is Thieves' Tools. When it enters the battlefield, you could create a treasure token. An equipped creature can't be blocked as long as it has power 3 or less, and we can equip it for 2. So essentially here what we want to do, there's a card that we're going to eventually get to, that whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, we get to create a treasure token. So it's just a card that we can get that damage in for free, create a treasure token, which helps us synergize very well when it comes to us making more treasures on the battlefield. We have Dragon's Fire. It's a 2 mana instant speed spell. As additional cost to cast this spell, we may reveal a dragon card from our hand or choose a dragon we control. It deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. If we reveal the dragon card or chose the dragon as we cast the spell, it deals fire damage equal to its power of that card to that creature instead. So we only play 1 dragon we only play 2 dragons in the deck. Their power is only 4, so at most we're gonna do 4 damage instead of 3 damage. But other than that, if we don't have any dragons, we can still at least do 3 damage at instant speed, which makes it pretty good. We got Sudden Breakthrough. It's a 2 mana spell. Instant. Target creature gets +2/+0 and gains first strike into a turn. So maybe we want to attack and aggressively. Your opponent's going to block. We pump that creature, give it first strike. Until a turn, then we may only kill their creature, not our creature. And we also get a treasure token out of it for 2 mana, which is actually not too bad when it comes to our treasure synergy. Then the last card up in the 3-drop slot is Callian, the Reclusive Painter. It's a 2 mana 1/2. Enters the battlefield, we can create a treasure token, and then other creatures we control enter the battlefield with additional +1/+1 counter on them. Each mana that was from a treasure token that was spent to cast them. So essentially, we can just pay treasure and cast a creature, and that creature will get +1/+1 for each treasure that we used in order to cast a creature, as long as it was treasure mana, making our creatures, even if they're like 1/1s or 2/2s, that much stronger, much more aggressive against our opponent, and our opponent then has to actually deal with them. Then the 3-drop slot, we have Skullport Merchant. It's a 3 mana 1/4, enters the battlefield with a treasure token. For 2 mana, we can sacrifice another creature or treasure, and we get to draw a card. So it's just a card that has built-in draw mechanics, and the thing is, we just got to sacrifice creatures in order to actually do that. But other than that, for 2 mana, having a card that can just draw cards is definitely very good and helps us, maybe draw that answer we're looking for. Then also we have the Soul Shatter. It's a 3 mana instant spell that each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker with the highest mana value among them. 1 creatures and planeswalkers they control. So essentially, depending on what your opponent's doing and what's on the board, we can make them sacrifice maybe their planeswalker if that's the highest casting cost, or even one of their own creatures. Especially some of the creatures that can get very big very quickly. Maybe your opponent doesn't have too much going on, and you get rid of a card that's been pumped up really big. You got Zorn, the Elemental. It's a 3 mana 3/2. If we create 1 or more treasure tokens, we create 2 of those tokens and 1 additional of those tokens instead. So this is kind of the key card that helps us make more and more treasures, even if our thing's only going to create 1 treasure. Now we'll get 2 treasures. If you get more copies of this and get more copies of it out, it's not legendary, so you can have as many copies as the battlefield can hold, and you may be able to create 3, 4 additional treasure tokens depending on how many Zorns you have out on the battlefield. Then you got Magic Missiles, which is another interesting card here. I'm kind of interested but not interested just because it's sorcery speed, but it can't be countered, which makes it a plus. But it deals 3 damage divided as we choose among 1, 2, or 3 targets. So you do 1 damage to 3 things, you do 2 damage to one thing and 1 damage to another, or you just do 3 damage to something just to get rid of it. And overall, in a matchup where your opponent may play counters, is definitely a very, very good card. And the idea that you can split the damage spend how you need it to is also makes it very good. The one downfall, I think, to it, why you may not see it played a lot, is because it is sorcery speed, so you do have to cast it on your turn, which is the one downfall to a lot of removal. If it's only sorcery speed, it does, take it back a peg. Then we got Grim Bounty. It's a 4-mana sorcery spell that destroy target creature or planeswalker. We get a creature treasure token. It's decent spell for the deck, though it is sorcery, but it is the benefit of it creates treasure, which just synergizes very, very well for the deck overall. Then you got Horden Ogre. It's a 4-mana 3/3. Whenever it attacks, we have to roll a d20. And depending on how we roll, 1 through 9, we get to create a treasure token. 10 through 19, create 2. And then 20, we get to create 3. So a card that just, is very greedy and it helps us try to get more and more treasure. It's definitely something you may want to put some like Thieves' Tools on, because it then makes this card unblockable. And we now get, every time this creature attacks, we'll get treasure created based on, whatever we roll out of it. So it is something that's a little bit RNG, but definitely synergizes very, very well for the deck. You got Jaded Sellsword. It's a 4-mana 4/3. Enters the battlefield. If mana from treasure is spent to cast it, it gains first strike and haste on the turn. And like I said, we do have a lot of ways to gain, treasures and then spend those treasures to cast our creatures. Just synergizes very well with our treasure synergy. So overall, decent card for the deck to kind of attack in aggressively. Yeah, Immerstrom Predator. It's a 4-mana 3/3 flyer. Whenever it becomes tapped, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then the other ability here is we get to sacrifice another creature. It gains indestructible end of turn and tap it. So it's one of those things that can, if your opponent has some sort of board wipe, you can always, sacrifice another creature, even the creature is going to die in the process, and then be able to give this thing indestructible so our opponent can't get rid of it. And then every time we're just going to attack, we just get to exile something, and it just gets bigger and bigger. If our opponent can't deal with it by direct removal, the only thing they can do is exile it. Orcis, Prince of the Undead. It's a 4-mana X spell, and it comes into when it enters the battlefield, choose 1. Each creature gets -X/-X on a turn. You lose X life, or you have to return up to X target creature cards with total mana value X or less from graveyard to the battlefield. They gain haste at the end of turn. So this thing is kind of one of those things that you may lose creatures in the early game, and then this is something you can tap in for X and get some sort of X trigger, whether it's some sort of board wipe kind of presence by doing the -X/-X, or getting back X creatures back onto the battlefield that can attack and hit your opponent in the face. So it is one of those things that is very situational, but it is something that if you do pull it off, you can have some big impact on the board overall. The next card up is Westergate Regent. It's a 5-mana 4/4 fly-in ward. Your opponent has to discard a card. Whenever it deals damage to a player, put that many +1/+1 counter on it. So it is one of those things, if it deals 4 damage, it gets 4 +1/+1 counters on it, now making it 8/8. If it does 8 damage, it gets 16. So it's one of those things, if your opponent can't prevent the damage being dealt to them, they're gonna get that. You're gonna get that many +1/+1 counters on it. So it is also one of those things that if we can give it some sort of like trample or something, it could be one of those things that your opponent just has to figure out how to deal with it. And also making the ward ability discard a card makes it actually pretty decent, as if like your opponent doesn't have a deck that draws a lot of cards or has a big hand, it makes it very, very challenging if they really want to remove it with some sort of direct removal in some sort of way. And the last card up in the deck when it comes to creatures is Goldspan Dragon. It's a 5-mana 4/4. It's probably like one of the strongest like red cards at the moment just because of its ability. It's a flying haster. Whenever it attacks or becomes target of a spell, we get to create a treasure token. And treasures we control have tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 2 mana of any one color instead of 1 mana of any one color. So just making our treasures that much more beneficial to us, allowing us to cast more and more things because we have much more mana and how many treasures we have out. So overall, a very good card that synergizes very well. And sorry, this is actually the last card. Red Dragon. It's a 6-mana 4/4 with Fire Breath. When it enters the battlefield, it does 4 damage to each opponent. So it just does 4 damage to your opponent's face, regardless of if it even attacks. So for free 4 damage for 6 mana is not too bad, and then you get a 4/4 flyer out of it. So it's an okay dragon, nonetheless. But overall, pretty decent card that just kind of fits well, okay with the deck. And then overall, the mana base is 10 of the swamps, 9 of the mountains, 1 of the pathways, and 4 of the mires. And the deck overall plays pretty well. If you get the treasure synergies out, you can start creating a bunch of treasure tokens to then sacrifice to certain things or make things that much stronger when it come out of the battlefield. So it's definitely a deck that is a little bit more. You have to kind of see the lines that you need to do in order to get certain things to happen. But it is one of those things that can be very explosive once you start getting the treasure generation going and sacrificing and drawing more cards from the deck. It can kind of like play very very smoothly. So I know this is kind of like the first video back, and I know maybe it wasn't the greatest just because I'm kind of a little bit out of it. I am a little bit tired. I am kind of getting used to the new setup and whatnot. But guys, if you have any comments or questions down below, let me know. If you guys want, I will be doing a follow up to this video with the other 5 starter decks, just because I want to kind of dedicate X amount of time to each starter deck. I didn't want to put 10 in one video and then make the video like 2 hours long. I figured I'd do one now and then one the next time I upload. So if you like the video, hit that like button. It definitely helps out a lot. If you're new here, when I post new videos on the channel, hit that subscribe button. It definitely also helps out the channel, puts a +1+1 counter on the channel. But until next time, I'll see you guys later.